What if I told you the truth about Charlie Kirk's murder wasn't buried by enemies, but by people standing right next to him? Because according to Candace Owens, Candace Owens is done being quiet. The real roadblocks in this investigation weren't strangers, weren't outsiders, weren't mysterious figures in hoodies. Nope. Candace Owens says the people blocking the truth were much closer. Close enough to hug him on stage, close enough to call him family, close enough to rewrite the entire story, and before anyone could even blink. And today, Candace Owens finally reveals who prevented the truth from coming out and why they did it. Buckle up. This is political celebrity gossip meets true crime, wrapped in the most chaotic conservative soap opera America has ever seen. And trust me, it only gets messier from here. If you think Candace Owens just dropped one bomb, wait until you see the grenade she's throwing next, because the first clue begins with a timeline that refuses to stay still. The timeline that refused to sit still. You know what's wild? In a real investigation, the timeline is supposed to be the easy part. Time doesn't lie. Cameras don't lie. Phone logs don't wake up one day and decide to change their story. But in Charlie Kirk's case, the timeline moves around more than a politician in an election year. From the moment that shot went off, the story started shape-shifting. At first, everything was simple. There was a shooting, chaos, panic, people screaming, security rushing in. But then Candace Owens started doing what Candace Owens does best: replaying, rewinding, zooming in, and asking the one question everyone else was scared to touch. Why does none of this line up? On paper, this should have been straightforward. Who called who and when? Who moved where in those first 30 seconds? Who said what right after the gunshot? That's basic day one investigation stuff. But every time Candace Owens looked at what Turning Point said happened versus what the footage and audio suggested happened, it was like trying to line up two completely different movies. Erika Kirk says Mikey McCoy called Erika Kirk within seconds of the shot, voice shaking, saying, "Charlie's been shot, get the kids, get security." Pastor Rob McCoy says Mikey McCoy called him to say, "Dad, Charlie's been shot in the neck." Meanwhile, the footage shows Mikey McCoy with the phone already up, walking calmly away like someone finishing a business call, not someone who just witnessed an assassination. That's not a timeline. That's a storytelling competition. And Candace Owens noticed something else. Every time new footage leaked or a new angle appeared online, the official explanation adjusted just a little bit to fit it. First it was, Mikey wasn't on the phone yet. Then it was, well, Mikey was just taking videos. Then it became, okay, Mikey was on the phone, but he was just shell-shocked. At some point, Candace Owens basically said, are we solving a case or watching improv night at Turning Point? What really set off alarm bells for Candace Wasnans was the precision. We're talking milliseconds being used to defend behavior that already looked bad in real time. Suddenly, people were quoting numbers, 834 milliseconds, like that somehow proved everything was fine. Sure, it looks weird, but it was less than a second. Great. So now instead of why did he do that, we're being told he did it suspiciously fast, but with math. And while all of this was going on, the one thing that never seemed to show up, a clean, consistent, verifiable timeline released to the public with footage, phone logs, exact timestamps, and a clear sequence. Instead, Candace Owens says what we got was vibes, edits, and emotional speeches, not evidence. That's why Candace Owens keeps hammering this point. When the truth is on your side, you love timelines. You post them, you pin them, you walk through them step by step and say, here, look, this is exactly what happened. But when the truth is not your best friend, suddenly the timeline becomes blurry, flexible, misremembered, taken out of context, or still under review. And that's why in Candace Owens' mind, the timeline isn't just messy. The timeline is the crime scene. And if the timeline is this unstable, imagine what happens when Candace Owens starts digging into who was controlling the footage that could have settled all of this in 5 minutes. The cleanup crew, and why they moved so fast. This is where Candace Owens says the truth got blocked. Literally, within minutes, not hours, not after the shock wore off, but minutes after Charlie Kirk was shot, someone from Turning Point USA swooped in, grabbed a surveillance camera, yanked out the SD card, and vanished like it was a Mission Impossible prop. Their excuse? We didn't want Erika Kirk to see something traumatic. But Candace Owens did see the footage, and it wasn't graphic. So why the rush? Why the secrecy? Why remove the one thing that could have provided instant clarity? Candace Owens says this wasn't protection, this was interference. interference. And interference means someone didn't want investigators or the public seeing what really happened in that moment. But if the camera removal raised eyebrows, what Candace Owens uncovered next practically ripped them off. The speech that felt written before the crime. When the memorial came, everyone expected heartbreak, shaking hands, trembling voice, maybe a moment where Erika Kirk couldn't even speak. But instead, Erika Kirk stepped on that stage polished, poised, and delivering a speech that sounded like it had gone through 3 drafts in a brand review meeting. It wasn't grief, it was production value. People weren't expecting a Broadway-level performance. They were expecting a devastated widow. But Erika Kirk's speech flowed like the narration of a documentary that had already been edited before the events were even over. Every line hit perfectly, every pause felt rehearsed, and every mention of moving forward, forgiveness, and legacy came out suspiciously clean for someone who just lost their husband in a violent public assassination. And that's exactly why Candace Owens' jaw hit the floor, because the timing wasn't just fast, it was unnervingly fast. Less than 2 weeks after Charlie Kirk was killed, Erika Kirk wasn't just speaking, Erika Kirk was strategizing. Erika Kirk wasn't just mourning, Erika Kirk was announcing new leadership roles. And Erika Kirk wasn't just processing trauma, Erika Kirk was delivering a speech that sounded like it had a moral, a theme, and a vision statement. It wasn't a eulogy, it was a corporate keynote. Then came the line that froze the internet. I forgive him. Most widows would be screaming for justice, but Erika Kirk forgave the killer publicly, before the investigation was even finished, before the evidence was released, before the timelines were clarified, before anyone even knew what actually happened. It was the speed of the delivery, the pacing, the way every sentence felt so neat, so polished, so perfectly shaped, that made viewers say, wait, did she already know what she was going to say before any of this happened? And once people replayed the footage, zoomed in, slowed down, studied frame by frame, the vibe got even stranger. Erika Kirk didn't look shocked. Erika Kirk didn't look confused. Erika Kirk didn't look like someone who just witnessed the worst moment of her life. Erika Kirk looked like someone who came prepared. Candace Owens said it bluntly. This speech feels like brand management, not grief. And the more you watch it, the more that combo, composure, certainty, pre-written forgiveness, and zero demand for answers, starts looking less like a reaction and more like a narrative launch. A narrative meant not to mourn, but to move the story where certain people needed it to go. And if the speech was strange, wait until you hear what happened when Candace Owens looked into the footage that somehow started disappearing right after the memorial. Because that's when this story shifts from suspicious to strategic. Candace Owens finally names the blockers. When Candace Owens said, "I'm done hinting, here are the names," the internet didn't breathe for a solid 3 seconds. Because up until that moment, Candace Owens had been doing what Candace Owens always does, dropping breadcrumbs, implying sabotage, raising eyebrows so hard they nearly leave her face. But then, she snapped, and the filter vanished. This wasn't the calm, polished Candace Owens that networks book for polite debates. This was full, everybody move, I'm taking the gloves off, Candace Owens. Candace Owens didn't just name names. Candace Owens practically created a cast list for the alleged cover-up. And the wildest part, every person Candace Owens pointed to had already been quietly hovering around the edges of this storyline, like background characters waiting for their close-up. First up, Candace Owens called out the inner circle, the people closest to Charlie in his final months, the team who controlled schedules, security, messaging, and access. According to Candace Owens, these weren't just colleagues, these were the people with the keys to the timeline, the footage, the communications, the final hours. Then Candace Owens turned her attention to Turning Point leadership, the executives who were supposedly pushing press releases, handling crisis PR, and allegedly controlling what the public was allowed to know. Candace Owens said they weren't simply supporting Erika. Candace Owens accused them of actively resisting transparency, and let's be clear, Candace Owens didn't just say they know more. Candace Owens said they blocked the truth. Candace Owens accused them of withholding footage, manipulating the timeline, scrubbing key details, preventing early witnesses from speaking, and even burying internal messages that could answer major questions. Candace Owens didn't soft pedal anything. Candace Owens said the quiet part out loud. The investigation didn't stall by accident. Someone stalled it, and then came the bomb. Candace Owens claimed certain people inside the organization pushed for silence. delayed responses, and tried to keep the narrative clean until public attention died down. And just like that, Candace Owens wasn't fighting the system. Candace Owens was fighting Charlie's own professional family. Candace Owens naming the blockers didn't just shake the story, it flipped the table. Because once she said those names, once she pointed at the exact people she believed steered the direction of the investigation, the entire internet collectively gasped and went, oh, this wasn't miscommunication, this was deliberate. And if naming the blockers shook the room, wait until you see what happened when Candace Owens confronted the missing footage. Because that's when the cover-up theories went from whispers to wildfire. The why and the motive no one wanted discussed. Every scandal has a what, every cover-up has a WHO. But the moment Candace Owens walked into the why, the internet held its breath. Because motives aren't random, motives aren't emotional, motives are strategic. And Candace Owens finally said what everyone else was whispering. The people blocking the truth weren't protecting feelings, they were protecting power. Here's the part nobody wanted to touch with a 10-foot pole. Charlie Kirk wasn't just a political figure. Charlie Kirk was a brand, a movement, a fundraising engine, and a public personality worth millions in influence. And when someone like that dies suddenly, violently, and suspiciously, two things happen instantly. One, there's a power vacuum. Two, there's a scramble to control the narrative before the vacuum becomes visible. Candace Owens' claim is simple. The motive wasn't personal. The motive was structural. Candace Owens believes certain insiders saw Charlie's death not as a tragedy, but as a transition point, a handover, a restructuring opportunity, a moment where narratives needed to be tightly managed so the organization could continue without collapsing under scrutiny. And that's why Candace Owens says the blockers acted so fast, because if the public got answers too quickly, if the investigation opened too widely, if remote details, timelines, messages, or security failures were exposed, people wouldn't just be asking, who killed Charlie? They'd be asking, why did certain people benefit so quickly when he was gone? That's the motive people were scared to discuss. Was the motive money? Was it influence? Was it control over an empire Charlie built from scratch? Was it ideological, tied to the donors Candace says pressured Charlie in his final weeks? Candace Owens believes the motive wasn't about covering up the event, it was about protecting the system. Because once you start pulling at the thread of who blocked the truth, you inevitably pull at who controlled access, who made decisions, who gained power, who didn't lose their position, who suddenly moved up, who instantly had more influence, who benefited from confusion and silence. And that's where the story gets dangerous. Because Candace Owens isn't pointing at random conspiracy shadows. Candace Owens is pointing directly at the people who had the most to lose and the most to gain. And when you ask why, you don't just get answers, you get motives that make you rethink the entire narrative. But if the motive made people nervous, wait until you see what happened when Candace Owens dug into the money, because that's when quiet suspicion turned into full-blown panic. So now the question isn't just who blocked the truth. Candace Owens just answered that. The real question is, why were they so desperate to silence it? Because if Candace Owens is right, if insiders interfered with evidence, silenced questions, and choreographed the aftermath, then this isn't just a murder investigation anymore. It's a cover-up unraveling in real time. Let me know what you think in the comments. Is Candace Owens exposing a truth nobody else wants to touch? Or is this internal war tearing the movement apart? Drop your theories, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because this story is far from over, and the next revelation might just flip the entire narrative on its head. See you in the next deep dive.